Thank you for coming out. The performers we have tonight, this evening, have a wide range of careers and perspectives, but all of them have an intimate experience with the topic at hand. When it comes to the expectations, maybe, that people come to the audition when you're there, or come to what it is that this character that has a particular name or a particular nationality that you read for, when it comes to those expectations in the audition room or what it is that you're expected to bring to a role, can you talk to us a little bit about what it was like when you started versus perhaps what it's like now, and if it is any different?
My first experience with the acting bug was back right after college when I lived in Los Angeles. And I always had an interest in theater growing up and decided to go for a role as an extra in a film about an archaeologist in Egypt, and thought, why not on the side from my engineering job at the time to explore that. That was a classic example of the really ugly stereotype that had been evolving up until that point. Just very briefly, it's kind of evolved from the Casanova lover man to then the subservient kind of go-between for the colonists in the region, and then finally this form that we see now in all its glory as the ugly Arab terrorist, the one-dimensional Arab terrorist. That experience I had in LA, that was back in 1990, was that second example of the subservient go-between, the bright white British archaeologist in Egypt and these ignorant helpers by the pyramid bearing through the tomb and fearful of the boogeyman that was inside the tomb. And I ended up walking off the set. I said, this is ultra racist. This is not why I want to be an actor. I'm not going to reinforce this stereotype. Thank you. And it is unfortunate, this is what we're confronted with, and there's a lot of background as to why, and not to get into the context of the why so much, but how it fits in with propaganda and political foreign policy and basically dehumanizing a people. But that was my first experience. And yes, it's evolved since, and I know we're going to get more into changing it, but what it really is and how it's evolved, and other ethnic groups have had their own stereotypes to confront. The greedy Jew, the Shylock character, the drunken Irish in the vaudeville shows, the pimp African American, the Hispanic drug dealer, and those have not gone away. Those are reinforced regularly. There have been great progress, for example, the filmmaker Spike Lee in dispelling those stereotypes, but it's all very real here, but I think it's really been pervasive, this Muslim, Arab, one-dimensional character, and what you're presented with. So to answer your question in terms of present, frankly, I don't audition for these types of roles. My agent knows that I will not feed into the stereotype or feed into propaganda films. One example was a film about Saddam's sons that I refused. I was offered the part. I hadn't known what the background was. I read the script, and basically, we've rewritten the story about Iraq. There's no history of America's relationship in the CIA with Saddam Hussein for 3 decades. There's the Marines come storming in and kill one of Saddam's sons, and the streets of Baghdad flood with Iraqis carrying American flags, chanting USA, USA. So these are the layers we need to kind of consider when we talk about the stereotype, is where is it coming from? And of course, we'll get into more about how we confront it and how we deal with it. But when I audition, it's for a role of a real person, sometimes a bad guy, depending on the context. And we're all actors. We love to pretend, and we'll play any role and give truth to that role. But we also have to be conscious that we don't have the luxury of, let's say, a white male actor who wants to play a bad guy, doesn't really need to consider, oh wait, I'm always playing a bad guy. What does that mean? Me looking Middle Eastern, am I feeding into that or not? And we all make our choices as actors as to what, do you play along or do you make your own script with it? So hopefully we'll get into that a little later as well.
We will, and I think that's true. That's a layer that performers of color or performers who have historically been excluded, there's another layer that people have to deal with about the sort of, it's not just enough to prepare for the audition in the room or doing the job, you have to prepare for all this other stuff that comes with it, right? The choices you decide you're gonna make, the conversations you're gonna have with your agents about whether or not you want that work, what are you gonna do when somebody says something outrageously stupid in the room? These are things that a lot of folks don't have to deal with when they're not subject to some of this other baggage that comes with these expectations. Sheetal, I mean, what has it been like for you? Because, and we've talked about this earlier in the green room, it's different. The stereotypes that Amr described for men are different than they are for women when it comes from this community. What did you see early on, and have you seen any differences at all over the course of your career?
I mean, I think it's as we've been saying, it's a very layered conversation. I think there's obviously the layer of just a person of color, being a woman adds another layer to that. But not to get into, I mean, I think right now the conversation that we're having right now is in terms of what a casting room was like, 10, 15 years ago versus now, and I think it's very different. I think, number one, because we're in a world where you can call people out, and people want to hear about it, and you can easily tweet, Facebook, whatever method you want to use about whatever just happened, and you'll have people on your team, you'll have people on your side. You don't feel like there's no recourse for things that would happen, which is positive and negative, probably. When I first started out, my first maybe 3 meetings with representation concluded with, great, we want to sign you, which one of your names are you going to change? And it was as if they were asking me, a question like, what's your address? It was such a no question, thing that because people did it. And I have a lot of colleagues that have done it, to each their own, of course. And like you were saying, I think we all, unfortunately, have been in situations where we're forced to kind of decide what your path is going to be and what your boundaries are and where they lay and what parts you'll do, what parts you'll audition for, what part you might ultimately take, your name. I mean, things that you shouldn't really have to think about. As a woman, we're dealing with a lot of other sexuality issues, what we're doing, what we're asked to do in the room, the way we're talked to, the way we're dealt with on set. I mean, there's a whole other thing we can get into there, but so that being said, I didn't change either of my names. That was a choice I made. And, I'm proud of that. And it's something that I would never look back and have done differently, but it has cost me jobs. I've had people in the room back in the day literally say to me, people are just not comfortable with someone of your name playing this part, whatever that meant to them, even though it was not even true what they thought it was. Not that it would be okay either anyway. So I think, it's that hasn't happened in a very long time, that conversation of your name. But people are still asking.
It hasn't.
Not in a very long time. I mean, it hasn't. But I will say I have a lot of colleagues and a lot of friends that have either they've changed it or they have a name that's a lot more anglicized as one of their names just because that's the way they were named, and it's been a different road for them. Or, and I'm fully... my background is from India. There's no mix, which is another conversation that I have to deal with because I don't have the complexion or the coloring as most stereotypical Indian women do. So that is a whole other discussion. That being said, I have friends of mine that are actual mixed race people, and that has also been something they've been able to use to their benefit because telling somebody, oh, no, I'm not fully that. I have this, I have a little bit of this in me, has helped them. People feel more comfortable with the idea that they're hiring someone that isn't, fully one thing because they have something to be able to talk about otherwise. So pros and cons, we can get into that, but those conversations are things that I dealt with a lot. That I don't as much, but I think now we're in a different place. Like I said, we're in a very open world where everyone's talking about these things. I think people are forced to be much more aware and cognizant of what they're saying and talking about in the room. That doesn't mean that this stuff isn't happening behind the scenes anyway. They just might not say it to your face, or they might not bring it up. But I have found you can tell when you walk in a room, and this is how I make decisions in terms of if I want to move forward and working with people. There is an underlying tone, the questions they ask you, the way they work with you on the material. You can tell immediately by the questions they ask you if there's someone that is interested in getting it right or not, And I've been thankful that a lot of people I've worked with have been really great, but I've also worked with a lot of douchebags. And they're everywhere, right? So, and again, you make, like you said, you make choices as for what things you're going to end up working on. And what's hard about that is, someone's going to end up taking the part at some point. So you have to sit there and you have to decide, is it better that I take it because I can then have control somewhat of how this is going forward? And again, for me, that decision has been, if I'm in the room and someone really wants my opinion to make it better and get it right, then I might consider it. But if they have no interest, then I have no interest either, and it's going to be a terrible, terrible, kind of experience, and then I don't do it. So
I'm picking up on some emerging themes if anybody's taking notes. There's a lot of individual choices, right, that artists have to make.
Yeah.
And how does that impact your own career, your ability to actually earn an income and feed your family and those sorts of things? But also, what does that impact on the larger community, on the images and the stories that are out there, on what are you reinforcing expectations, in whether it's name, accent, those kinds of things. And I kind of want to talk about the name thing for a second. I want to talk about it in a particular context of what I think we're seeing, what I'm hearing is that there is a greater demand for authenticity when it comes to certain depictions, hopefully, right? That people are getting the message that more and more, if you tell a story about a given community and it doesn't ring true to that community or for the audiences who are looking at it and go, I don't quite buy that person as whatever, that there are consequences for that. And whether maybe it's a cynical business decision or not, there is a demand from audiences and from producers for a certain level of authenticity. But at the same time, one of the foundational principles of your craft is it's not what you are, it's what you can play, right? So there's going to be a tension between this demand for authenticity and it's not what you are, it's what you can play. And I think a lot of times your name, and I'll take my name's Adam Moore. Now, clearly, it's not surprising when you hear me talk and I show up in the room. I'm actually the biggest white guy I know, right? But depending on how long I've been out in the sun and my facial hair and the costume I got on, take your pick. I could probably pick a whole bunch of different things and people would interpret me being able to play different things. But my name will lead them to certain assumptions. The phenotype that I'm expressing at any given time is going to lead them to certain assumptions. Renee, I don't know if you knew I was going to put you on the spot with this one, but I want to start with you about this idea of it's not what you are, it's what you can play, and how that has functioned in your career because you have experience playing characters of this world and yet have managed to find a way to stay true to yourself throughout. And anyone can take this about names and about authenticity, but I did want to start with you.
Well, I don't know how true I've been able to maintain a state of true to myself. I certainly try that. But the name is definitely one of the most absurd things about it. I think every person sitting here, anybody who decides to become an actor, doesn't become an actor because he only wants to play his ethnicity or his perceived ethnicity. Now, and if people can't see past the name, I don't think anybody would have a problem playing any person of their own ethnic background if the character were well written, multidimensional, but you don't want to be just pigeonholed into just playing that. And most of the people, particularly, it's ironic. I moved to Germany in 1993, and that's where I started acting professionally. And that's where I first encountered this sort of thing. People didn't even believe I was American over there. They said I don't look American. I'm like, what does that mean to you? So I fought those stereotypes over here, always praising how, pluralistic America is to this day. But I didn't think once I moved back here, I'd be hearing the same discussions I heard 20 years ago in Germany. So that's an interesting development from the days that I remember growing up in the 70s and 80s, where I remember seeing, most of the actors I saw had, some kind of immigrant background, And in many ways, I feel that the entertainment industry has shifted more almost to like the 50s in terms of the ethnic makeup, or everyone at least wanting to, come across as very Anglo-Saxon. It's not sexy to be ethnic anymore, it seems,
And I hope not. I hope that's not the case.
Well, I hope so too, but that's just sort of the impression that I've been getting,
Interesting.
So, and I think it also has to do with the writing, though. We briefly spoke about this. People of immigrant backgrounds or first generation, second generation, if they don't come from a lot of money, it's very hard for them these days to really get a high-level education or become writers or go into the arts. It's almost become an exclusive thing for people of upper middle class or middle class background. So I think that factors into it too. And until you have people of a more diverse background in the positions that make the decisions or that create the content, there's not going to be a lot there's not going to be a lot happening.
That's fair. Well, and so, and Maysoon, I know you want to hear from you about this, 'cause I think you guys were talking about the writing and who's in the room and where those stories come from. But Murad, I mean, from someone who is choosing to make a career here, given what you've just heard, why on earth would you do that? What makes you think you can do that? There's a path for you to do it.
It's funny. How I got here, I received an email from a casting director in New York a year and a half ago to come here and audition for this HBO pilot directed by Steve McQueen, saying that they were looking for someone who was ethnically ambiguous and apparently...
I love that one, ethnically ambiguous. Yeah. That's awesome.
And apparently that was me. At the time, I was working a lot in Morocco, and I didn't think about like crossing over and starting over, and because I was having a comfortable life back home. So I emailed back. I was shooting at the time in Algeria, and I told the casting that I can't come and read for the part here. Can I tape and send in the tape? I didn't get a feedback, nothing whatsoever, until 7 or 6 months later, from a different casting director in LA, telling me, we saw your file at this casting director's office in New York, but you were marked as being unavailable. Is it still the case? I said, no, I'm available. What do you guys want me to do? Okay, can you come to LA? Which I did, read for it, and then met my manager who signed me, and I'm like, okay, let's give it a shot.
And so they found you. I want to follow up real quickly. So if people are trying to figure out how they make their way in this, they found you because of your work doing what?
I'm sorry?
They found you because of what? Was it a particular film? Was
I
it
don't
a particular...
know. I didn't ask.
You didn't ask?
No.
I thought you might want to know. Like, what are they looking at? It's just like, okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's the story that you never hear, right? It's all supposed to be about hard work, not just they've tapped you on the shoulder.
Oh, yeah.
But so, and how's it been so far? I mean, has it been in the rooms that you've been able to be in so far? How's it been?
I had one funny experience. I auditioned for this movie, Afghani character. The movie just came out. In the room, it went really well, and they were saying that they loved the read, and one of the producers even said that it was impressive. Then they give the part to a white guy. So I'm like, okay.
It's never happened to anybody on the panel, right? That doesn't happen. Maysoon.
Yes.
As someone who is absolutely adamant about making sure that you are a part of this business, whether or not anybody thinks that that's the right thing to do, I think those people are crazy, personally. But you have insisted through Arab American Comedy Festival, through writing and actually appearing as yourself and TED Talks and doing these things while still pursuing your performance career. What is it that you find to be sort of the single most determining factor, whether it's who is in the room, what their background is, what you come into the room with? What's kind of the biggest difference maker that you've seen either societally or individually that's gone on that allows for hopefully some more complex characters and greater opportunities for people on this panel?
So I'm a comedian. That's why I identify as first. I'm also a writer and an actress, but I'm a comedian. And when I was auditioning in New York City right after graduating college, my dream is to be on General Hospital. So I was auditioning for soap operas in New York because there was a bunch of them. And it didn't occur to me that being Arab was going to be a bad thing. Why? Because I grew up on the comedy of amazing Arab American actors. Danny Thomas, Vic Tayback, Kathy Najimy, Jamie Farr. So what I grew up watching was Arabs doing comedy. And when I started doing comedy, I didn't think that it was going to be something used against me. And also I think Arab is very interesting because, to piggyback what you said, we all look differently. My mom has red hair, green eyes, white skin. There are black Arabs. There are people who look like me, which I think is the stereotypical look. But Post 9/11, the image of Arabs on television shifted completely to the right. And the work that I started doing was to combat the negative images of Arabs on television, but to also remind casting directors that we could play something other, than terrorist, taxi driver, belly dancer, or burqa. So those are your 4 choices. And it's very fluid. You can, with the burqa, it's very fluid. But I also wanted to explain to them that South Asian wasn't Arab. And I love my South Asian brothers and sisters, but when I hear a heavy Indian accent playing a Palestinian character, it just takes me right out of it, immediately. So we had these 2 things where it was like, number one, we were trying to explain to people that Arabs were American, that it wasn't okay that all these depictions were negative. And that's why I founded the New York Arab American Comedy Festival, which is the idea of producing stuff yourself to explain to people how they can use you. And it had 2 components. It had the stand-up and it had the sketch. And in the sketch, we were writing sketches and reminding people that Arabs don't have to play Arab characters. And I know it's kind of like that best of both worlds thing, where we're like, why didn't they cast an Arab? And they're like, why can't I be the Lost Kardashian or like an Italian or Spanish or Greek, So we could play other characters. But what I think is interesting is how successful Arab entertainers have been in talk shows and reality TV. So when you're looking at things like The Real Housewives, when you're looking at Huda Kapt on the Today Show, Paula Faris on The View, Paula Abdul on the American Idol, Shakira on The Voice, we have been integrated, and it hasn't actually been about the ethnicity. So that's the place where I've seen it integrated the best. One of the places that's the worst is the other part of my career, which is political commentary. So we're right now in an election cycle where Muslims are vilified on a daily basis. And there's 2 different things that I have to constantly accomplish. And one is explaining to people that Arab and Muslim are not synonymous. So you can be Christian, you can be Buddhist, Mormon, Jewish, and also be Arab. And they kind of mix those 2 things up. But also, as I was telling my new friends back there, there's a real definition of what Muslim voices the news wants to put on. And the voices that they want to put on, again, goes back to this concept of, I say with Muslim women, you either have to be in niqab, like covered from head to toe, or you have to be a rejectionist. So someone like me who identifies as a Jersey girl, who identifies as devoutly Muslim, is not given a voice on the news because I'm not fitting the image that they're trying to sell. And I find it fascinating that I haven't gotten more work during this election cycle because Donald Trump has been so generous with his hate that I was like, this is my time to shine.
Bring it. Well, no, and I think that there's an interesting interplay because the things that you're talking about, you see making some inroads and some progress are things that aren't character driven, right? They're not scripted. These aren't people playing somebody else's idea of whatever the fill in the blank is. I mean, here we are, right? This panel is put together with this acronym of Middle Eastern, North African, and South Asian. We talk about larger communities, the Latino community, the disability community, the LGBT community. It would take too long, first of all, to just list out all the things that those things mean and to talk about all the separations, but because it's a huge difference. We talk the Manasa community. This is something that frankly came up because the industry sees this portion of brown folks as kind of interchangeable. And you talked about that. And so it's not a disability. Look, the deaf community doesn't have a whole hell of a lot in common with the people who identify as deaf or in the little people community or wheelchair users or whatever, or intellectual developmental disabilities. It's useful and it's necessary to activate people under these umbrellas, I think, to call attention to these issues. But it still comes back to this idea that there are other people with these expectations. I set up the idea that it's not what you are, it's what you can play. There are other people who get to decide what you can play.
Well, I think, not to cut you off,
No,
but
no,
I think that's really the core of the issue, is that the people who are writing, producing, and directing, if you have a show, now, and on a side note, this conversation is I feel like right now we've been talking about parts that seem to be narratively driven that have to do with an ethnicity. The point is we want to hopefully be working on parts that have nothing to do with the narrative of any ethnic thing kind of surrounded, or like just be a person. and the narrative has nothing to do with their ethnicity. I mean, that's what everybody else gets to do, right? I mean, all the time. And the only parts that we're up for should not be just if a part has to happen to be someone whose ethnic background is part of the narrative. That shouldn't be the only parts we're getting. And we're not. There's other things we're all doing, but I'm saying that that's part of the conversation too. But on what you're saying is, if the narrative and if the writing is about a specific ethnic narrative, or that plays into someone's behavior or decision making, then you need somebody of that ethnicity to be part of that team. Mm-hmm. And what happens is you have a lot of people who aren't any authentic part of that culture writing for other people that they know very little about, or they have very, general, they have a friend. I have a friend who's Indian. I have a friend who's, and that's their experience. So if there's no one in the room that's actually experienced the things they're writing about, that's the problem. And that is why, like you were saying, Adam, you were saying earlier that you feel like there's this need of people wanting to be more authentic. And yes, I think in theory that's true. However, we're still watching things like you said. I'm on shows sometimes and I'm like, that accent is not at all authentic whatsoever. You hear, like you said, an Indian accent is the same as an Arab accent, or there's so many different colors within these things, but they just are like, oh, it's fine. They group us all together, and no one's really making sure it's authentic, and you say something like, it's fine, and it's not. And the problem is, this is something that's going out into the world, and people are consuming, and people are watching it, and they are learning from what they're watching, right? If you have no knowledge of anything, that is their only sense of education. We grew up learning things off of media all the time, and that is happening more than ever. So I feel like it is our responsibility more than ever to try to be as authentic as possible, because otherwise our future generations are going to assume that's what it is, and they accept it. And some people will say, well, there's no problem, they don't mind, but they don't know any better because they don't actually know the truth, right? So, these are all, I just wanted to make that point.
And there's a lot of being thankful for whatever little morsel we're given. So when you say, hey, that looks like a Russian head covering instead of a hijab, they're like, no, it's fine. And like she said, you're supposed to just be happy that you're allowed to even be part of this. And such a big decision is being there going to help this? Or is this so bigoted and hopeless that I need to just step back and distance myself? But I don't know about everybody, but for myself, I have the privilege of turning down things, whereas other actors don't have that privilege. And when you're given the opportunity, to be terrorist number 3, I think everyone on the panel's been on Homeland except for me. But when you're given that opportunity to be on HBO, to be on NBC, it's hard to ask people who have no other employment to say no to that.
Absolutely.
I wanted to add another layer too. I mean, not only we have those limited roles available to us, like Maysoon said, these 4 interchangeable roles. There's another layer to it that is particularly frustrating, which is in the productions that are of Arab origin, the classics like Aladdin or something taking place in Egypt, we're excluded from that too. We're not allowed. In Aladdin, there was demonstrations in front of the musical Aladdin here in Broadway. I believe it was in 2014. A bunch of white people playing in Aladdin. The recent movie Gods of Egypt, if you look on IMDb and look at the cast, okay, I'm not personally like, wait, Gods of Egypt, I should get a part in this one. No, we're not even part of the narrative of our good work, and that's what's particularly frustrating. Now, not to sound negative, there are fantastic things that we'll get into later that people are doing to change that narrative and develop it, but that's what's particularly frustrating. We're not even a part of our own beautiful culture that is kind of mainstream. So that's an added layer. And you said something, too, that I wanted to comment on, and I forgot.
And I think I'm going back to Morocco, guys. Okay.
Whoa.
No, okay, we're gonna pivot right now. We're gonna make sure that doesn't happen.
About choices, what Maysoon said, you're being about choices. Yeah, it is tough. I worked as a lawyer. I paid off my debt. Maybe I have that luxury. But I do know actors of Arab or Muslim or South Asian ethnicity who do take that stand of, no, if I keep feeding into this, that's a short-term fix versus a long-term fix. If I keep feeding into it, how is that going to change things in the long run? So there are people that do forego money that they need. This is their career, and they take that risk. And yes, like I said, people make their choices, and I'm not going to impose my own standard. But at the same time, I find it hard to believe that these stereotypes that are getting perpetuated over and over again are going to go away when people keep feeding into them.
Yeah, I think I tend to see it as, maybe that's just me, is almost a false choice for a lot of people, because there isn't one, right? It's, do I make my health insurance? Am I able to actually pay my rent or not? Especially as you're coming up. So when presented with very narrow views of these things, I almost think that there's hardly any choice a lot of times, and it does take a great deal of, intestinal fortitude to be able to say no to work that you don't want to be a part of. But along those lines, so what is it then that, no one's going to go about making a movie about the FBI without going to research it. And as Sheetal said, people shouldn't be going about telling stories they don't know about. I don't think it's necessarily true that I can only tell a story that I am intimately familiar with in my own personal experience, but I surely should go out and research some stuff if I know that I'm telling something that I don't know terribly well. What is it that you have witnessed or you have been involved with yourselves to change things in the room, suggesting things after the fact, whatever it might be? There are different ideas about, well, look, I'm just going to refuse it outright, or actually I want to get in the room and I want to change stuff from the inside. So whoever wants to start with that, I'd love to hear some practical things that have happened to you or of that have happened that have actually made a difference for the better.
Well, actually, I think it really depends on where you are, in the hierarchy of things. For things to really change, I think it has to come from the audience, because let's not forget, there's an economic model to everything. And the one guy who's cast to play terrorist number 3, if he kind of revolts and says, I'm not going to do this, or this is racist, they'll just, replace him, and that's it, shot himself in the foot. Until you can be in the room with the creators themselves, and have that conversation in subtle ways. You also, as an actor, you don't want to start your career off as being considered difficult. You have no leverage, so that's another factor that plays into people being in that uncomfortable situation, and I have complete understanding for that. So I think the best thing, in my opinion, if you can, is do whatever job you can as best as possible. And use the opportunities you have behind the scenes or off camera, whatever, to make friends, let people see who you are, kind of network that way. And in the hopes that the bigger your parts get, that's when you can start having a little bit of influence on the character. Outside of that, I think there just has to be more of a public debate about it, because most actors are really, they have nothing to say on set, unless you're sort of at, the top of the call sheet, you're just a hired gun, basically.
And to jump off what Renee said, if I
please.
could, the idea that one of the biggest ideas of the Arab American Comedy Festival was to make sure that when people did look for actors of a certain ethnicity, we were able to provide them with the actors. And whenever you're trying to authentically cast, the big debate or complaint or excuse that you hear, whether it's an ethnic minority or with disability, is the assumption that we cannot play the roles as well as the non-ethnic person. So it's really important to be really good at what you do and not just be like, you must cast an Arab. You have to be like, or an Indian or a South Asian. You have to be able to provide those actors and be ready to say, I know you feel like you can't cast this and that you need the big names, but these are actually the people that you don't even realize are your big names, So I think we need to be proactive in being really good at what we do and being able to provide people with resources so that when they do want to authentically cast, we're able to say, here are the people.
Contact SAG-AFTRA EEO and Diversity Department if you'd like to find any of these talent, and we will get you in touch with people like Maysoon and other communities that are underrepresented. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to jump in on a little bit what Renee said. I totally understand and appreciate everything he said, but I disagree a little bit in the sense of, I don't know, I've always been very vocal. Maybe people think I'm not difficult, I'm very assertive about everything I have to say, and I don't think it's necessarily cost me a job. I think people, they might not hire me, but I think they respect me, and I think it's very clear who I am in the room. Yes, I think you get into a place where you might not have, you eat another slice of pizza that's $1 for like the next month, but that's a choice, right? Not everyone is comfortable with that. But again, like we talked about earlier, you figure out who you are and your boundaries. And I know what he's saying. Obviously, people are going to be listening kind of more astutely if you're number one on the call sheet. But I feel like I've been on both sides of that. I feel like I've been in situations, I had the honor of working with Albert Brooks. I did a movie with him years ago. And when I first heard, he did a movie called Looking for Comedy in the Muslim World, which I was in. And when I first heard about it and I met with him, I was like, really? Like what? And there was no script, and I was like, oh my gosh, and really was a little nervous, and my, all my red flags went up. And I met him, and there was a perfect example of someone saying and asking all of the right questions and wanting and was making the movie as kind of a gesture of trying to show another side of a community and the world. And when I got the part, every day, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? How do you feel? Do you think we should do that? And really made a concerted effort. And, I think he set the tone for the environment at which that would then happen on all the different levels. And I feel like that happens more than you would imagine if you just take the chance to just give it a shot. I think give people the benefit of the doubt and hope that they want to make it better. They might not. But I really, maybe I'm a little too idealistic. I think 2 times out of 3, they'll appreciate it. They might not change at all. Maybe you'll get 7 out of the 10 changes you want, but that's progress.
I'm sorry. I think you're right, actually. And I think you should always, I think it helps to make suggestions, but you do have to tread carefully. And I think there's a difference also in the example you mentioned. You're talking about a film. There's much more creative freedom there. There's much more of a time frame. Television is such a tight schedule, and you got so many cooks in the kitchen. If you even suggest to change a comma, people start kind of raising their eyebrows. You know what I mean? So in film, which is much more of a collaborative process, I totally agree with you. Principally, and just in principle, I agree with you in general. But you should be careful, and formulate everything in a non-combative way. The most important thing is to also not assume that people are writing certain things out of from a bad place, that they're being racist intentionally, whatever. A lot of times they're not even aware of it.
The delivery
Exactly.
for sure is,
Yeah.
and I've experienced this in television as well. I think it's on both mediums, but delivery is everything. I think the way you approach it and going with the benefit of the doubt in mind and just saying, hey, I'm thinking of, I've played characters where the name is so specifically tied to a certain ethnicity, and then I get the part, and I'm like, do you want to keep the name? Do you not want to keep the, and even those conversations are important to be had. And most of the time, people are like, oh, I didn't even think about it. Oh, sorry, I've been dealing with 100 other things, which are so important, as is this, but they're thankful that you brought that to their attention. It's such a quick little thing, and, I think always
Diplomacy is important in this
diplomacy.
business.
I mean, back to your original question, though, I think it raises the issue of, how do you have to work within the system to change it. And there are opportunities to do that. I'm not minimizing any of these ideas that were discussed, but we also have to think about making our own stuff. I mean, there's a lot of levels here. Like, for example, there's flipping things on its head and throwing it back. Here's this ugly stereotype. You know what we're going to do? We're going to flip it and show you how ridiculous it is. And that comes through a lot of times in comedy, like in Maysoon's Arab Comedy Festival. You see people bringing it out and just showing how ridiculous it is. And there's another level of doing it, which is just, here's a story about a family that happens to be Arab origin, and there's the dad who's weird, there's the mom who's smart, and they're just people. And it's just simple, and it's almost heartbreaking to say that we have to show that we're normal people, but somehow, the problem is with these other approaches is there's a danger, and a third approach, which I've seen a lot here, particularly in the theater arena here in New York, where Arab origin writers or South Asian origin writers feel like they have to address these stereotypical issues all the time. Where every time it seems I go to an Arab play, it's always talking about the veil. We have to talk about the veil, we have to talk about terrorism. Again, kind of falling into that same trap of these preconceived stereotypes and then feeding into them again. Why don't we talk about a chicken farmer who's who's a drug addict, or just something different, to change the discourse. So there's a lot of variables that work, and there's a lot of great organizations that I've worked with here in New York that just change that script, and it uses those two different approaches, not the third one of, recycling issues. And, there's a group called Noor Theater here, a group of women of Arab origin who do fantastic work, wide open and a broad range, and just putting an alternative out there. And not to say that there's potential progress in the mainstream industry now. I'd like to be idealistic and think people are becoming more enlightened and, oh wait, Arabs are people too, Indians are people too. I think it's more economic. I think it's a business, and we can't reject that, and thinking, wait, maybe there's a bigger market if there is an Indian guy in this, and maybe we can get more distribution overseas, and that would be more interesting. Whatever the reasons are of it kind of changing, I still think I'm not going to wait around and wait for the industry to completely evolve. I'll say my 2 cents. I think we all will, and add to that. But the people that are doing stuff outside of that and using those different techniques I said it's very powerful. Where it's like, oh my God, that I never thought of it that way. I recently did a short movie. An Indian actor who always either got terrorist number 4 or IT guy, and what inspired him to write this short movie that I participated in was, what if this guy takes it a step further? He looks ethnic. He looks like an Arab terrorist guy, or that typical role. So he gets attacked by these 3 white guys in a gas station in Jersey, and then he pretends to be a badass terrorist. He's like, okay, well, if you're going to give me this stereotype, I'm going to at least protect myself with it. And so we flip it. We go where I'm a cop and my colleague's a cop, and kind of berate him for using that filthy stereotype himself. So just flipping it and being creative with it. There's tons of opportunities. We have to start writing our own stories and not kowtow to these issues. I mean, I just saw an audition piece for some play where the woman gets stoned to death. I go to Egypt every year. I've never seen anybody getting stoned to death. But
Thank God.
there's ugly things in our society. Of course there is. But when it's just these narrow issues, it just marginalizes us.
Right.
And
Those things are. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think that when we're creating content, it's so important to be diverse within our content, to piggyback exactly what you said, and also not fall into the trap of writing the same stories that we see all the time. So right now I'm working on a romantic comedy where the characters happen to be Arab, but they're much more American than they are Arab. And you have to have extreme patience when you're trying to create and produce an idea that is not what the stereotype of your ethnicity is. So one of the things I did was I wrote to my writing team that at no point can an Arab man hit any woman in this sitcom. And they wrote back and they were like, oh my God, this is such a comedy. Why would we ever have an Arab man hitting a woman in this sitcom? And I took 20 minutes out of my day and I went on YouTube and I gathered a bunch of clips of Arab men just hauling off and whacking white women in different television shows and movies. And I sent it to the writers and I said, this is a real thing. This is a real thing. This is a thing that is an image that has been repeated over and over and over. And I also, in writing the sitcom, you have to be careful not to segregate yourself. And make sure that you have diverse characters around you, because it makes the ethnic characters shine, even more. And I don't like the idea when we do something where everybody's disabled, everybody's Arab, everybody's one, because I don't think that works into mainstreaming us. So when I worked on this, I also made it very clear that, there couldn't be just one disabled person. We're 20% of the population, there has to be a couple more of them running around. I made the point that there are Muslim characters, so I wanted one of the girls to wear hijab, one of the girls not to, be in the same family, and show that this is something that could be a choice, And I think that when we have the opportunity, we have to be careful not to fall into what they want. Because you go in with this fresh idea, and they're like, I have an idea. Why doesn't her father kill her? And you're like, no, that's not what. So you have to kind of be part of the change when you do have those opportunities.
I mean, to piggyback on what Mason's saying, it's funny because we see sometimes on shows now, they have we're seeing more and more, especially on television. Television's killing it in the sense of trying to really make an effort. And you see a bunch of shows where there are lead, not just ensemble characters of color, but lead characters of color. But then will you see a second one or a third one? That's the question, right? And like Maysoon said, it's not. It's hard because like, well, we got the black guy, we got the Asian person, we got the, you know, and then they feel like they've ticked all the boxes, and then it ends up becoming kind of surface, and then they're not actually dealing with what's reality in terms of if you were to go to the DMV, what would you see? That is what America is. That is the plethora of our society, and I think Shonda Rhimes talks about it all the time, how she hates the word diversity, and it's more about inclusion, and that when she writes, she's not doing anything that she feels is, not to misquote her, is so amazing. It's just that she writes a world that she lives in, that she feels is authentic and real. And that's really, we need more of that. You know, she's just casting and writing for people that, again, not necessarily are playing characters that have to do with some narrative being their ethnicity.
And I think it is important that you guys have brought up the idea that we talk about the industry. It's not this monolithic thing, right? There is new media. There's that kind of high-budget new media stuff. There's the user-generated stuff. There's indie film. There's short films. There's network. There's cable. There's big studios. So I mean, the way that each of those things function and the people who are making decisions in those places are different. But we're all talking about the same thing, which is somewhere along the line, this is, if people are making any money at it, is a business. And so there is kind of this risk-reward calculation that is made as to what are people going to watch and what's going to sell. I'm interested to know, and you started down this road, and I kind of want to get some more detail from you guys. So who's making the stuff that you think is the best that's out there right now? I mean, we heard about your experience with Albert Brooks, who did it the right way, in your opinion. Who else, what projects, what companies, what individuals, what experiences have you had? Because a lot of attention is paid, especially, and I'm thankful for social media being able to bring attention and get a whole bunch of people surrounding a particular issue to be vocal about it in a way that we have never seen. We have these convergence of technology where anybody can make anything and get it to audiences, and in real time anybody can make or break it in social media. This is a really different and exciting time. But I also think it's very important to call out the people that are doing it well, because there's a lot of energy paid on torching people for not doing it right, and I don't know that that helps them come back to those communities to tell those stories, to try again, because why would they when they can't seem to get it right no matter what they do? So I think it's helpful for people to understand, well, what do you think, and what have your experiences been where it's being done well?
Well, I think the general cable channels have been really strong in terms of, and original in terms of the characters they've been coming up with, the writing and everything, but they're also not beholden as much as, let's say, the major networks to ratings. Netflix can get away with experimenting a lot. So you have Orange is the New Black, or a lot of shows like that are in small ways, but beginning to kind of test audiences' appreciation for different kind of characters, and I think that's great. It's unfortunately not happening a lot in film anymore, because film is becoming, the model has just become, everything's just tentpole and geared much more towards a global audience rather than, you know, a domestic audience. You know, when people like Woody Allen have to go get their money in Europe and shoot over there in order to do a movie, you know where we're at. So in terms of seeing really interesting characters and also truthful characters being depicted, I see it predominantly on cable now with the streaming services.
Anybody else?
Yep.
I had a meeting at Universal back in December with this exec, and we talked about this. I was like, I hope you're not going to be offering me just tourist parts. And he said, no, things are changing. And he gave me the example of Jurassic World, and that made a lot of money in India because they had Irfan Khan as one of the actors. And now movies that are made are not only made for the US market, but for the world. And that exec told me that now they want to have also actors from different backgrounds and different ethnicities to reach those markets, and which is a good thing. And hopefully they will deliver.
I haven't seen it done well anywhere, and I think there's a real Oh my God, was that way too negative?
No.
I just saw
I'm-
your
no.
face kind of rose
wanna
up.
hear it.
I haven't.
We
seen
all
it-
wanna hear it.
I haven't seen it done well anywhere. The closest thing that comes to it is definitely on cable, but I also think that there's a grave lack of intersectionality with any character that has an ethnicity. So if you're going to be ethnic, you can't be LGBTQ. You can't be also, a person with a disability. And I haven't seen it done well, but I'm happy to be seeing more actors of ethnic descent being mainstreamed. So like Omar Metwalli in The Affair or Rami in Mr. Robot, seeing more of that and having them be more mainstream and having it be less about their ethnicity is great. Seeing stuff that's been done well about the South Asian Muslim Arab community, I actually haven't seen a single thing, not one. So guys can send me stuff I should watch.
I'm gonna send you a few things.
I was going to say, a couple weeks is the Indian Film Festival of LA. I think they've got some good stuff going on there.
No, I mean the mainstream.
the mainstream.
I mean like when I'm flipping through channels like, NBC Superstore, here's a show that's really like empowering a Latina strong character and disempowering the disabled by casting someone who's not. But I'm not seeing those Arab characters. I'm not seeing those Muslim characters that are mainstreamed and not just a caricature. I haven't seen it done well. Whereas I think something like Fresh Off the Boat, I think that's really well done. And that's an example of doing something that revolves around an ethnic family that their whole world is still so much more reflective.
So the traditional institutional greenlighter studio networks are slower to get to this than maybe the people who are creating the content.
And when they
from
do
independent
it, sometimes
sources.
they make it too pigeonholed toward that community
Right.
so that it doesn't read. And that's where I think Fresh Off the Boat and the Goldbergs really succeed in bringing in the world that's not part of that small community.
I mean, there's been some really cool castings lately. I think people are really trying to make the effort. Sarah Shahi's playing Nancy Drew. That's a pretty cool thing that
That's
happened.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I
awesome.
mean,
Yeah.
there's been a number of those kinds of castings that I think are happening, and I'm just excited to see what's going to keep happening because I think people are making the effort. But I think Baysun's right. We have to be better than everybody else in the room. We have to put in a lot more work. We can't just go in and be good. We have to hit it out of the park to be considered at the same level as some of the other parts. And so that is another layer. That is another kind of thing that we're dealing with because number one, they have to consider it, and then we have to prove that we can do this even better. It's like it's a whole other standard that we're held to.
You got
And I'm all
Emmer?
for Adam for supporting those shows that do show, that effort and taking those risks sometimes. And I do agree that it's more likely to happen on the more like a Netflix type program and everything. And I had the opportunity to have a role in House of Cards, and this was just one scene in this last season. And I couldn't believe it when I read the sides to go and read for this. I said I couldn't write this better. And it's not about getting my opinion out there as an Arab American or not, but just it was a simple role of a character on Capitol Hill criticizing the anti-Muslim hatred that's going on. And they picked up right off, the headlines from Donald Trump and everything, that travel restrictions and ID badges and everything. It was just a very nice scene. They didn't have to have it in there for the plot to continue or anything, but it was just, here's a perspective. Maybe they're not representing that perspective, but just to put that in there to say, there are people that are against this and they're speaking out against it. And, you laud that, of course, and then I think the best way to support this is, as actors, is to participate in it. Just, oh, wait, this is a good role. And if it's an Arab role or if it's just, I'm a guy and I don't, a good example of that is Tony Shalhoub playing Monk for how many seasons? And, you don't think of him as the Lebanese guy. I happen to know he's of Lebanese origin, but he's just a guy with his quirks, and I think he's, all his hang-ups and everything, but it's not about his ethnicity. So,
Right.
yeah, participate in it.
And just a housekeeping thing, I got one question earlier. I don't know if anybody has any other questions. If they wanted to send them down that way, someone will collect them, and I can take a look. But I'm sorry to interrupt, but go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing, actually, that might play into this whole situation as well, and that's going back to the economic model, where I have been seeing very nuanced and subtle depictions of people, not just of Muslim backgrounds, but of people of all kinds of backgrounds, has been from European films. But they have a funding of the arts. And I think one of the biggest problems in this country is that everything is entirely commercially based. We wouldn't be sitting here having this discussion probably if we would have a substantial funding of the arts where the occasional art house film could be funded and broadcast or screened on several screens in the United States, and we'd all have a debate about that and sort of thing like in Europe. But here, every
And Canada.
producer, and Canada,
Yeah.
here every producer might say, you know what, I want to write this kind of character, but, you know, the word on the street or in middle America, whatever, right now is people don't want to see that kind of character,
Yeah.
so I can't do it. You know, that's a problem, and that's something we as artists in this country should really start addressing.
That's true. Screen Australia or the stuff that's going on in the UK. I mean, there's a lot of national funding bodies that we simply
We're falling
don't
behind
have.
artistically.
That's fair. I think that's a good point. We still collecting questions and stuff? Okay, great. That's okay. Before we get to some of these audience questions, I did want to pick up on something that I was hearing just a little bit of, which is, yes, it's great that people are making their work and we can call attention to it, but we're still not really making a lot of headway in maybe some of these institutions. With a few exceptions, you mentioned Tony Shalhoub, and there's some things like that have made some difference. Have you found that having people from this community in these rooms, if they exist, does that matter when it comes to, are people from this community predisposed to maybe think about this in a different way, or from any immigrant community, one way or the other? I mean, do you see that the composition of who's making these decisions actually makes a difference?
I mean, I think so. I would just like to make the point, though, I mean, everyone has different experiences, and everyone has different lives, and I have a lot of friends that are South Asian that have no connection to the culture whatsoever. So people write and be a part of stories that mean something to them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same of all of ours. So that being said, yes, I think you hope that people in the room that have had experiences dealing with any kind of ethnic association or even the minority experience or as a woman, you know, kind of keep that in mind and write accordingly, but they're not forced to, they're certainly not beholden to, they don't owe us anything. Again, it's just about everyone's kind of personal preference in terms of what they want to write. But I do think it makes a difference, but I do not expect it when I walk into a room just because someone is, I think it'd be the same, it'd be me doing the same thing to them that they're doing to me. I can't certainly expect them to write a certain way or expect certain thing from them, but it's great, you know, when they think that way.
I think it's always helpful to have someone who has actually lived in a community, writing about a community. And one of the things I am excited about is seeing more inclusion or diversity of writers who are writing new things. I think sometimes that our community got to the game late. Because yes, we've been part of the fabric of America since the 1600s. We, you know, a portion of our community came over as slaves too. But we weren't really part of the arts as heavily as I'm seeing now. So Renee was talking about the fact that it's expensive to be part of the arts. Another thing is that when you're born into immigrant families, it's not necessarily the path you're encouraged to take or allowed to take.
Perhaps actively discouraged from
Yeah,
taking.
or actively discouraged to take. You know, we're engineers, lawyers, and doctors. And so I think that we're coming in late to the game, but what I'm seeing is the more writing I see by people in the community that they're writing about, the more excited I am about it, even if they're not writing anything about that community. Just having the authenticity of someone who's lived it behind the words that are going to be spoken seems to make it stronger, and I'm seeing so much more writing from our collective community than I have in the past 10 years.
That's encouraging.
I wanted to say something positive.
Well, I was
because
going to
didn't-
say, if you didn't, Marab was just going to leave the
I
country,
don't want
I
them
think.
to think
So
that Arabs are all just like,
you're freaking people out.
Murad is leaving the country.
I think
because
so.
of
He
me.
keeps checking his watch.
Now
He's
I'm
like,
staying.
I gotta,
Okay,
Yeah.
yay.
this was the moment you all saw that we forced him out.
When he wins his Oscar, he'll thank me.
I'm going to go to some of the audience questions as we wrap up here, and hopefully I capture the essence of what you've asked. The first one is about something that you picked up on, and I think about the sort of diversity within the community, right? And this idea that one thing is interchangeable for the other, or that Arab is interchangeable for Muslim, is interchangeable for Persian, is interchangeable for, you know, religion and nationality and all the rest of it. how is it that you feel, either as an audience member or as a performer, let's say, when you see that happening, let's say, you know, like Memoirs of a Geisha, let's take it out of this community for a second, right? Memoirs of a Geisha, clearly Japanese story. It's a historical period, clearly by Japanese folks. Two main leads in that film are Chinese.
Yep.
I'm going to argue that 90% of this country, if not more, didn't know, didn't care. And until we maybe get to a place where people say, what a bunch of shit, those people are Chinese, we need to do something about that. Not that they can't do it, not that they're not amazing, not that they're not international box office stars, but where's the authenticity? How is it that you guys feel, either as audiences in this country or audience members in this country or as performers, about that, about playing something that you're not, or should you, or can you, or I don't know, I'm kind of throwing that out there about that diversity within these communities and how that's playing out.
I guess the question is, do you feel like you have to be of the same ethnicity to play the circumstance that you're end up playing? And I don't think that's the case. I don't think that I can't relate. I mean, when you're talking about the story of a character, I think we all, at the end of the day, you know, experience things that are, you know, universal. So, and I think you said, Renee said this, we didn't become actors just to play one thing over and over and again. I think the point to be made is that that's not what I'm not saying that. I don't think that I can't play other things, and I'm not upset when some people are playing other ethnicities too, if I feel like they can bring something authentic to the role that may not be what everyone expects, but they're doing a kick-ass job at it too, you know? I think the issue comes when there's just not that many roles, and you feel like it's a tough question. There's not a lot of roles, so who should get those roles? And it's hard. It's a tough question because you feel like you want to give it to the people who don't get as many roles, but is that fair? I don't know.
Who can play those roles?
Right.
I mean, I think we're way far off from being able to get that refined in the analysis, because I think it's really imbalanced at this point. I mean, you can look at even saying somebody like Idris Elba played an American guy, this British actor. He pulled it off. It was believable. It was truthful. When you start losing the authenticity, I think that's when it becomes an issue. And there's a big debate now about the actress who was cast as, I believe it was Nina Simone.
Mm-hmm.
And she's of lighter skin. I think she's Dominican originally. Those are important issues. I'm not minimizing them, but I think we're way off the charts in terms of getting to those finer point issues. I think it's really about truth and authenticity. And as I mentioned before, I mean, you have an Arab piece, Aladdin, and there's not even an Arab people in it. I think the message is what is the, where is this coming from? I think it comes from ethnocentricity. I think it has a lot to do with propaganda and stereotypes that reinforce a lot of other things. And that kind of blanketing of we're almost interchangeable, where it becomes lazy, where an Iranian person with an Iranian accent, like for example in 24, is playing somebody who's Palestinian. It's like, oh, Bahrouz, you are not a terrorist. And it's like, what? That doesn't sound Palestinian to me. But again, not to get to the big pictures, and for those of you who are interested in reading more about how Hollywood vilifies Arabs, there's a fantastic book by Dr. Jack Shaheen by that same title. It's called Real Bad Arabs. It's the beginning of real spelled R-E-E-L. And he really gets into these bigger issues of propaganda and, again, saying dehumanization. I mean, we live in a society here in America where former Secretary of State on 60 Minutes was asked if the UN sanctions against Iraq, even though they resulted in the death of 500,000 Iraqi children, was that price worth it? And she said yes, that was Madeleine Albright. So we're talking about dehumanizing and whitewashing and interchanging. So we need to look at these issues. We cannot just ignore them.
I think that we are talking about something that's complicated, because ethnicity and race and the overlap of those things is not black and white to use that. Because like I said, my joke about being the lost Kardashian, I could be Spanish, I could be Greek, I could be all these things. I think it's dangerous when we ignore the visible cues of an ethnicity or a race. So yellow face is really a big deal. Brown face is really a big deal. And it's when you have an actor who is so clearly not of that race or ethnicity playing it, that's when you get into something that reminds us of blackface, even though it has different histories. That's when you get something that just completely takes you out of the viewing experience because it's inauthentic. And also, it's something that I find offensive. Margaret Cho has been extremely vocal about how offensive she finds the fact that yellowface is still mainstream where blackface has been shunned. But then, you know, like I said, when we're talking about people who kind of look more fluid, can I insist that my entire family on a sitcom is played by Arab actors only if you do have actors that clearly look like these people? An accent is not required. Darkening, lightening, or stretching yourself in any way is not required. I don't know if I can fight that fight, if it's a fight that I should be fighting, but I know that when the image is completely contradicted, it adds to the dehumanization of races and ethnicities that we're not exposed to anyway. So it's important that we allow that community to play themselves.
But I think that goes back to what you said, that there's such a scarcity of these roles that when they're then cast with someone else, that people get offended. Because if, you know, somebody who's of Scottish background gets insulted because somebody who's Irish got the part, I mean...
Yeah, they're not so few and far between those roles.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying? The thing is, if we were all playing and we're satisfied with a plethora of different kinds of roles and characters, if we were in a repertory company and there were particular parts, we would be cast according to our general physical attributes. And we wouldn't be offended by that. That's part of our job as an actor, is to learn accents, to educate ourselves about the background, and to, you know, to play as many different parts as possible.
Well, it is interesting, right? You go to any sort of formal training and you are expected to be able to play a wide variety of things, to inhabit a whole bunch of characters, to be able to do that work, and then you get out in the commercial world and everybody says, well, you're not ever going to actually be able to do all of those things, you realize. You're only going to be able to play this very narrow thing. This is the last question. It's a little, and as you think on this one's maybe a little more fun, perhaps.
Nice.
Perhaps you can also think about any final words of wisdom for our audience and for the world at large that will see this and hopefully see it a lot, about what you think might be the one thing that people should be thinking about as they pursue this work, to keep in mind as they do to address the things we've been talking about today. But the question is, from the audience, which I kind of like is if I haven't butchered it, is somebody mentioned, I think maybe Sheetal had mentioned, what it means to be American, right, or this idea of America. And so the question comes about, what, if anybody can speak about, you know, especially the people who've worked abroad, what kinds of stereotypes are there about what an American looks like? What is American? What isn't? Right? Is it still blonde hair, blue-eyed? Is it still, what is the girl next door in the U.S. supposed to look like? Because, by the way, both of these are girls right next door. And yet, oftentimes, probably not, you might have to convince folks that that's the case. So are there any things that, from the outside perspective, that America is viewed as one way or the other? Does anybody have any insight on that?
The women are blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and very thin, or brown hair with really, really milky white skin and short and under a B cup. That's the theory about American women. And American men have like super big guts. They're very, very, very pink. They're drunk and they're armed.
So me is what you're saying. So I could.
Are you armed
I
right
can
now?
play that. Well, I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah, don't
but-
admit it. They still know you're brown.
All right, I know.
Your inner soul is white, but they
I
see
know.
brown when they're shooting at you.
I forget sometimes. And anybody else? Anyone?
Well, I think it's more... I think despite everything we're talking about, particularly outside in Europe, I think we're still seen as the most colorful country, pretty much, there is on the planet, you know? And I think there is some truth to it. I mean, particularly if you go to cities like New York or Los Angeles or Chicago, whatever. But as far as what is American, I think it's just a set of values, a particular certain ideals we aspire to, idealistically speaking. I'm not talking about in reality, but we tend to forget or not really want to address the fact that this country was founded by, white Anglo-Saxon people from England, predominantly Denmark, and they kind of started that, and then more people came, and it kind of became mixed up, and there's always new generations of new migrants and new immigrants coming into this country, and so it's constantly changing. So I think what's different about America is that we don't really have a predominantly ethnic makeup. But we like to think we do, or certain people in our society like to think we do.
But I think if you travel to other countries, I mean, one of the first things I like doing when I go to other countries is to turn on their television and see what TV shows they had that they have. And I think that's what the image of America is, what they're being fed and what they're being told. We're in a different world now. Obviously, there's computers, there's internet, people can consume in a different way. But generally speaking, I mean, when I was growing up, when I'd go visit my family in India, they had 2 channels, and they only had The Bold and the Beautiful, and they had Baywatch. So that's what they thought America was, because that's what they were told, right? Now they have 100 channels and MTV, and they see so much. But again, it's what are they consuming, and what TV shows and what movies are being shown in these countries. That's really where people get their information, unfortunately, in the masses, the kids, the people growing up. And every country has a different kind of way of figuring out what that is. Some TV shows aren't shown in some countries, and some movies aren't allowed, and some don't even get the internet. So, unfortunately, and then we have, the political scene that's this year that unfortunately have some really big, loud mouths saying things that unfortunately don't put a positive light on America, right? So it's really what they're fed.
Do you guys think anyone, when they think of, from outside the country, when they think of the image American, do you think anyone thinks of Black Americans? And I think, Obama's president, so they should, but, I know that in the countries I visit, it's exactly what you said. It's Dallas, it's Bold and the Beautiful, it's Baywatch, and I don't know if the first thing that comes to someone's mind when they hear American is also
but there's
the Black
also Michael
community.
Jordan and Michael Jackson.
Right.
And me growing up in Morocco, people were aware that
Michael Jackson's going to be played by a white
Ralph
man.
Fiennes, that's,
Help me, please.
That, I think it goes back to what we were talking about.
Yeah, Michael Jackson is really being played by a white man right now.
What are we seeing? How does this reflect our society here? I mean, you go to Costco or go to, a place where it looks like the United Nations here. And is that the responsibility of anybody that makes a movie to reflect all that to a certain extent? And what are we seeing? So yeah, they are seeing that narrow view, but I think they would be very surprised if they walked into Costco, or Price Club. I remember my sister.
Well, that's what I wonder. Is there that disconnect between what we actually look like and I know there's a disconnect between what we actually look like and for the majority of the things that we export. But hopefully, what we're seeing is that the established wisdom of or non-wisdom of that won't play overseas. We're seeing things just break those myths. Nobody's going to watch that kind of show. Nobody's going to watch a Black show. Nobody's going to watch this show. Empire is killing it, right? A lot of these things are making a ton of people money and making a lot of those people who had that wisdom rethink the entire thing. That actually people do want to see the real reflection of this country, as they have always wanted to see what goes on here, I think. And we have a choice and an obligation, I would say, and a responsibility to make sure that it is more reflective.
Which is why I always laugh when people say, we try really hard, we're trying to cast, diversely, but you know what, it's really hard to market these things, it's really hard to get people, and I would argue, I'm like, you're not giving the audience enough credit. People
Agreed.
want to see what they see when they walk outside their door. They want to see the world. They want to see more than just one color when they turn on their televisions and they go to the movies, and I just don't think, I think we're unfortunately not giving our society enough credit. They're pretty smart.
Not only that, we're missing one big point, which is we're talking about art here, and we can't dismiss how money and corporations are impacting the arts. So when it's about marketing, just tell a story, tell a true story. People will eat it up, and just you get formulaic, you get these people in these boardrooms in Hollywood and saying this is going to sell. Tell a true story, tell an honest story.
Do a good job.
And we're still not getting it. I mean, look at the Oscar nominees. I was just reading a list of African-American Oscar nominees, but look at the roles they were playing. Maid, slave, cook. So again, there's a long way to go. But these are all factors we need to consider. There's a lot, and I'm not making it so complex that it can't be addressed. And my brief thing, just in response to Adam's question, make your own stuff. Make your own stuff, tell your own stories. The thing that I go to Egypt a lot and meet a lot of producers, and I see them making American stories. They just copy them. I mean, almost exactly. There's a movie called Shall We Dance you may be familiar with. The guy made it in Egypt, exact same script, Egyptian actors. Go sit in a cafe in downtown Cairo with a notebook for a week. It's like the Truman Show. It's psychedelic.
Wow.
You can tell, we got 7,000 years of history. We can write our own stories. Anybody out there, and it's not just about ethnic. Tell your own unique stories, your own experiences. And so many times people go to workshops and say, well, how do I make it this so it can sell? No, flip it. And those are the shows that I think we're all getting more and more attracted to, where it's just, oh my God, this is crazy. Orange is the new black. If you were to hear a pitch for that 10 years ago, people would laugh at you. They're like, are you crazy? That's not going to sell. So make your own rules, make your own work, and make your own art. Forget about the commercial part, and maybe the commercial part will cover itself.
And be what you want to see in the world. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, you and your choices and again, it's going to be different for everybody, but figure out what that is for yourself, figure out what success means to you, and then live it.
I think we consume art because we want to see ourselves. Maybe we want to see the truth about ourselves that maybe we can't handle on our own self, in a more palpable way. And I think the truth is always going to be more interesting than some complete fraudulent depiction of reality. We feel disconnected from that. And so even if you're doing entertainment, if you add an element of truth to it, the more true it is, the more we rejoice and say, we recognize it. Yes, that's true, in comedy in particular. If it's not true, nobody's going to laugh. So.
Final words.
Final
Sorry,
words.
that's your
and
job.
then just to go back to what you said, and then when it's not true, it doesn't work. There is the example of Kings and Prophets. The show just aired twice, and then they canceled it because they had a bunch of white guys speaking with a British accent in Judea, and yeah. So let's just make true and real stuff, and then success will follow.
I think my final thing is don't let people tell you it can't be done. There's always someone who's the first person to do it, and you can be the first person who does it. And say no to able-bodied actors playing disabled on screen.
Tell true stories, I think, is what we heard, right? And I think that's right. The audience for Orange is the New Black is not made up of women in prison or women who used to be in prison, right? Yeah. That's not who's interested in this story, right? There's an underestimation that has been of what's going to play in Peoria or what's going to play overseas, that we've targeted things to the lowest common denominator for a long time. And I think the thing that I heard most was there is an incredible pool of talent and stories that have been woefully underserved and untapped, that if people think that they have to keep rehashing the same old sitcom over and over again, you don't, because there's so much material and so much talent out there that has not been, in the best possible way, exploited for their stories and for their talent. So go exploit yourselves.
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm hearing, right? Tell true stories. Huge thanks for everybody on the panel. Let's hear it for them right now. Maysoon, Mayrod, Renee, Sheetal, and Emir. We can't thank you enough for your candor and your time. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you next time.